His contempt, loud enough for all to hear, ruined her appetite. A veteran American who had served in Iraq. No one in the diner knew that, and worse, no one cared. She stood still. Her hands gripped the tray tightly. The long scar on her face lit up under the fluorescent lights. The whole place fell silent. Eyes averted. Not a single voice spoke up. Until a teenage boy in a military uniform stood up. His eyes held no fear, no anger, only absolute respect for the woman before him. And, in that moment, began one of the most moving veteran stories ever told by Justice for Veterans. Her name was Grace Whitmore. She had worked at Carril's Diner for the past 12 years. Every morning, Grace arrived earlier than anyone, wiping tables, slicing fruit, brewing hot coffee. A long, pale scar ran diagonally from her left cheekbone to near her jaw linea, faded cut from a time long past. She never explained it, never tried to hide it, just calmly tucked her hair behind her ear. Regulars had grown used to it. Strangers either stared or quickly looked away. Grace never complained, never missed a shift, never raised her voice. But sometimes, when she stood at the sink rinsing glasses, she'd quietly dab the corner of her eye with a napkin. No one noticed, and no one asked. But that day, someone did. "You might not believe this, but I think you used to be in the military." The teenager's words froze the diner. Grace looked up. For the first time, someone met her eyes not with pity, not with discomfort, but with respect. Her voice was soft but firm. "I served in Iraq, medical technician, 2008. A beat of silence. Then she continued slowly, as if pulling memories from an old trench. "I got injured pulling a Marine out of a blast zone. I wasn't supposed to survive." The explosion flashed through her mind-white light. Blood. Screams. But when she woke up, the first thing she asked was, "Did that young Marine make it?" And he did. Grace said no more. She didn't have to. Because in that moment, something shifted in the way people looked at her. After the war, Grace returned home with an honorable discharge and a scar no one wanted to see. There was no parade, no welcome sign, just a small rented apartment in the south side of town. Each morning, she washed her face with cold water, looked into a foggy mirror, and whispered, "I'm still alive. That's enough." A faded photo frame sat on her tableau group shot of her unit. She stood in the back row, smiling stiffly but proudly. No one in the neighborhood knew she was a veteran. No one asked. She didn't tell. Because in this world, people only see the scar, not the story behind it. Still, Grace went to work every day. Still polite. Still on time. Until this morning, when that scar was once again dragged into the spotlight like something she was expected to apologize for. "I pay to enjoy my meal, not to look at that," Randall Pierce said loudly, pointing at Grace's face like it was an error to be corrected. A spoon clattered to the floor. A plate bumped softly against the edge of a table. No one spoke. No one turned toward him. But no one looked at Grace either. They stared into their coffee, fiddled with their phones, pretending they hadn't heard. Grace stood there still, holding the tray, lips pressed tight, spine straight but eyes beginning to glisten. In her mind echoed, just like last time, and the time before. No one said a thing, until a wooden chair creaked backward. A teenager stood up, polished shoes, white shirt, shoulder patch, bearing a silver eagle. He looked about 15 or 16. Hair trimmed neatly, Riverside Military Academy uniform, pressed, crisp, silver eagle badge gleaming on his chest. Jake Everett. He stepped away from his table, moving slowly toward Grace into an airless silence. No one stopped him. No one knew what he was about to do. He stood before Grace, hands behind his back, not bowed, not shy. His eyes were steady, his voice low but clear. "I'm sorry to ask, but is that scar from the war, ma'am?" Grace looked up surprised, not by the question, but because, for the first time, someone had asked it with genuine respect. She looked him in the eye and gave a small nod. Jake placed his right hand over his heart and stood at attention, Thank you for your service. Grace was silent for a few seconds. The diner remained still. No clinks, no murmurs. Just two people, a woman who had once carried a rifle in the trenches, and a military cadet standing tall like a young sapling. She took a breath. Her voice trembled slightly, but rang clear. I was a medical technician, Iraq, 2008. Charlie Company, 27. She paused, eyes closing briefly, memories flickering like old film reels. There was an explosion. Someone cried for help. I ran in. A Marine was trapped under rubble. I pulled him out. Then everything went white. Her hand reflexively touched her scar. When I woke up, the doctor said I was lucky to be alive. She turned to Jake, holding his gaze for the first time. But I don't see the scar as something ugly. It's the price of keeping someone else alive. The diner was still silent, but now it was the silence of reverence. Jake nodded, his eyes bright. He said nothing more. But what came next would change everything. Randall Pierce scoffed, raising his untouched wine glass. Got you all sentimental, huh? What is this, some pity play or a performance? The glass hit the table with a sharp clack, deliberate, provocative. Jake turned toward him, calm and composed. No anger, no shaking. Just a steady gaze, like looking into something emptier than the man himself. You may not have worn a uniform, but you sit in a country protected by people like her. Randall sneered. I pay taxes. I create jobs. Jake took a step forward. You use your mouth to survive. She used her body to protect. If I had a scar like hers, I'd be proud. A quiet exhale echoed from somewhere in the room. Someone nodded. Another gently set their cup down. The air had changed. Just a minute ago, Grace had stood alone. Now, she wasn't alone anymore. A middle-aged woman at the back of the diner slowly rose. She wore a light gray sweater, holding a cup of still warm tea. My little brother died in Fallujah. If he were here, he'd call you his comrade. Grace turned. The woman gently placed her hand on Grace's shoulder, then quietly sat back down. An elderly man with white hair, leaning on a cane, spoke up next, this voice raspy. I was in Quezon. That scar of yours? It's not something to hide. It's a banner. Then a young couple, the wife's eyes glistening. My father never talked about the war, but he had a scar just like that. One by one, like candles quietly lighting up in a dark room, they rose. No leader, no prompting. They just couldn't stay silent anymore. The kitchen door creaked open. Tom Bailiff, diner's owner, in his 60s, broad-shouldered, hands still dusted with flour, stepped into the center of the room. He said nothing at first, just looked at Randall, then looked at Grace. His eyes were sad but resolute. He took off his apron and slung it over his shoulder, his voice deep and steady, like a church bell at dusk. Randall, you and your group should leave. Randall shot up, indignant. I've been coming here for years. Tom didn't raise his voice. He simply said gently, like speaking to himself, we serve people who know how to respect others. If you think you're better than someone else, the door's that way. No one clapped, no one cheered. But as Randall stormed out, dragging heavy steps and bitter glares, the weight in the diner seemed to lift a little. Grace still stood, tray in hand, but this time, not from fear. This time, she didn't know if she deserved what had just happened. Grace walked into the small back room behind the counter where coats hung, and the punch clock ticked quietly. She closed the door, leaning against the wall. No customers, no eyes, just a woman, finally allowing herself to cry. She grabbed a tissue from the shelf, covered her face with both hands, trying not to sob out loud. Not because of Randall, but because everything from the past 15 years had built up inside her, and now it finally had a place to spill. A soft knock echoed. A young voice, familiar, gentle, spoke from the other side. Miss Grace, I have something I want to give you. Grace opened the door. Standing there was Jake, steady, composed, but with something in his eyes, older than his age. In his hands was something small, silver, gleaming under the light. an eagle insignia. Jake held it out with both hands, as if offering something sacred. This was the first badge I earned at the academy, for discipline and honor. But I think someone else deserves it more. Grace stepped back, uncertain. Jake, I can't accept that. Jake smiled softly, but firmly. You fought. You endured. You didn't give up. That's why I'm giving it to you. He placed the badge in Grace's palm, then brought his hands together in salute. She looked down at the tiny metal shape, and her eyes welled up again. This time, not from pain, but because Francis felt seen, truly seen. As Grace and Jake stepped back out into the diner, it was as if the whole place had been holding its breath. No conversations, no spoons stirring coffee, just the afternoon light streaming through the window and the quiet pause between two heartbeats. An older man stood up, his hand pressed over his heart, eyes fixed on Grace. Then a young woman stood silent, but with a deep nod. Next, a teenage boy. Then a mother holding her baby. No one applauded. No one shouted. But every gaze was different now. No longer avoiding, no longer pitying. Only respect, quiet, but complete. Grace stood in the center of the room, her hand still clutching the badge. And for the first time in years, she stood tall. No longer just the waitress with a scar, but the woman who had walked through war and was still fighting every day. As the diner gently returned to its usual rhythm, Jake adjusted his collar and placed his cap on his head. He turned to Grace's voice, still soft, but carrying something deeper than his age. I don't know if I'll join the military one day, but I do know if I ever have a scar like yours, I'll never be ashamed of it. Grace didn't reply. She simply nodded, her eyes misty, and placed her hand over the badge on her chest. Jake turned and walked away. Just before he reached the door, he stopped, looked back one last time. Thank you for fighting, but thank you even more for staying. The door closed behind him. Midday sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating the scar on Grace's face, now no longer just a wound, but a symbol. Not every hero wears armor, and not every scar needs to be hidden. Some fought silently, asking for no recognition, no remembrance. But the worst thing we can do is forget they were ever there. Grace Whitmore is one of thousands of veterans who fought not just on the battlefield, but at home, where they are overlooked, judged by appearance, and forced to live as if they never served this country. Today, one teenager saw her, and so do we. This is why Justice for Veterans exists. To tell the stories the world forgot, to defend the honor of those who served, and to remind everyone that respect isn't optional. It's a duty. If you carry a scar of your own, comment, I'm still moving forward. If you've ever met a real-life Grace, share this story, because they may never speak up for themselves, but we can speak up for them.